You're walking across a frozen riverbank. It's 40,000 BC. The wind is doing that thing where it doesn't just feel cold, it feels personal. And you're barefoot, completely barefoot. Every step is a small negotiation between your skin and a ground that is made entirely of sharp rocks, frozen mud, and the occasional thorn that has been waiting its whole life for this exact moment. And somewhere on that miserable walk, one of your ancestors looked down at their wrecked, bleeding feet and thought, what if the ground didn't get to do this to me anymore? This is the story of when humans started wearing shoes. Not sneakers, not high heels, not those weird toe shoes that everyone agreed to stop talking about. We're talking about the very first time a human being wrapped something around their foot on purpose and walked off into history. And here's the thing nobody tells you. Shoes might be the single hardest piece of clothing to find evidence for, because shoes don't survive. Leather rots, plant fiber crumbles. Hide dissolves back into the dirt within a few centuries, so you'd think we'd have absolutely no idea when this started, except we do, sort of. And the way we figured it out is genuinely one of the most clever pieces of detective work in all of anthropology. Because the evidence isn't in a museum case, it's hiding inside your own foot. Let's start with the foot itself, because most people treat the foot like it's just the thing at the end of your leg that you stub on furniture. But your foot is an absolute masterpiece of engineering. 26 bones, 33 joints, more than 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments, all packed into a structure small enough to fit in a shoe and strong enough to carry you across a continent. For millions of years, our ancestors walked on these things completely bare, and the barefoot foot is tough. The skin on the sole thickens into a natural callus, a built-in leather pad that gets denser the more you use it. Hunter-gatherers who've never worn shoes can walk across terrain that would send you, specifically you, limping back to the car within minutes. Their feet are wider, the toes splayed out and independent, the sole like worn leather. To them, the ground we find hostile is just the ground. So if the barefoot foot is this good, this self-repairing, this optimized, why would anyone bother inventing shoes at all? Hold that thought, because the answer is going to come back around in a way you won't expect. First, the detective work. The toe bone that gave it away. In the early 2000s, an anthropologist named Eric Trinkhaus was studying ancient human skeletons, and he noticed something strange. He looked at the small toe bones, the little ones, not the big toe, the 4 smaller ones, and he found that in humans from a certain point onward, those bones got noticeably weaker, thinner, less dense, less robust. Now here's why that matters. When you walk barefoot, your toes grip and flex and push against the ground with every step. That constant stress makes the toe bones thick and strong, the same way lifting weights thickens your bones over time. Bones respond to stress by getting tougher. It's one of the most reliable patterns in the human body. Astronauts lose bone density in zero gravity for the exact same reason. No stress, no strength. Bones are lazy and they only build what they're forced to build. But when you put a shoe on, especially a stiff-soled shoe, your toes stop doing all that gripping work. The shoe does it for them. And over a lifetime, that means the small toe bones never get the workout they would have gotten barefoot. So they stay thin, weak, delicate. Trinkhaus realized this was a fingerprint. If you find a population where the small toe bones are suddenly getting weaker while the leg bones and the big toe stay strong, that's not a person who got lazy. That's a person who was wearing shoes because they were still walking long distances, still loading up their legs, just with something protecting their toes. When he ran the numbers across the skeletal record, the weak toe pattern showed up consistently starting around 40,000 years ago in parts of Eurasia. Think about that for a second. We dated the invention of shoes using the bones of people who never left a single actual shoe behind. We read the footwear off the foot. And the kicker? Some scattered, less consistent signs of this toe weakening show up even earlier than 40,000 years, hinting that occasional casual foot protection might go back further still. The strong, consistent signal kicks in around 40,000 years ago. But the behavior itself? Probably older. We just can't prove it yet, and we may never be able to, because the proof rotted away 10,000 generations ago. So that's when now. Let's talk about the oldest shoes we've actually held in our hands, because there's a massive gap between when shoes started and when shoes survived. The oldest known leather shoe ever found comes from a cave called Areni-1 in Armenia. It's about 5,500 years old, which means it was made around 3,500 BC, and it's remarkably well preserved. Basically a single piece of cowhide, shaped to the foot, laced up the front and stuffed with grass. Some researchers think the grass was insulation. Others think it was to keep the shape, like the paper they stuff in new shoes today. Either way, it survived only because the cave had this perfect, cool, dry, stable environment, a freak accident of preservation. Everywhere else, shoes from that era are simply gone. But that's not even the oldest footwear. For that, we go to a cave in Oregon called Fort Rock, where archaeologists found sandals woven from sagebrush bark. They're roughly 10,000 years old. Sandals, made of bark, carefully twisted and woven by hand 100 centuries ago, and still recognizable as sandals today. Now sit with the size of this gap. The toe bones tell us shoes go back at least 40,000 years, but the oldest surviving shoe is only 10,000 years old. That's a 30,000-year hole in the physical record. 30,000 years of people wearing footwear that left no trace at all. The absence of evidence, as always, is absolutely not the evidence of absence. The shoes were there, the dirt just ate them. And here's a strange wrinkle. We actually do have ancient footprints, fossilized impressions pressed into mud and ash that hardened over tens of thousands of years. Some of the oldest, in places like Africa, show bare feet, every toe clearly visible. But footprints only preserve under freakishly specific conditions, and a soft hide moccasin in soft ground can leave a print that looks almost barefoot anyway. So even our footprints can't fully settle it. The ground remembers the foot. It just doesn't always remember the shoe, okay? So we know roughly when. The much more interesting question is why? And just like with clothing in general, the answer is not as simple as it got cold. Theory number one is the obvious one: protection. Not even from cold at first, but from the ground, sharp rocks, thorns, hot sand, sub-zero ice, spiky plants, venomous things that live in the dirt and would very much like a word with your bare heel. A cut on the bottom of your foot in a world with no antibiotics wasn't an inconvenience. It was potentially a death sentence. An infected foot could take you out of the hunt, out of the migration, out of the gene pool entirely. So anything that kept the soles of your feet intact had real, brutal survival value. And this gets even more important the moment humans started moving into serious cold. Frostbite is a foot's worst enemy. Your extremities are the first thing your body sacrifices when temperatures drop because it would rather lose a toe than lose you. The groups pushing north into Ice Age Europe and Central Asia, the same groups that had already figured out fitted clothing, almost certainly figured out wrapped insulated foot coverings too. You cannot cross a glacial landscape barefoot. You just can't. The people who didn't solve the foot problem didn't make it far enough north to have descendants. And this is bigger than it sounds. Humans are the only species that walked out of the tropics and colonized basically every environment on the planet, from frozen tundra to scorching desert. We didn't grow new bodies for each one. We built equipment, clothing for the body, and footwear for the part of us that actually touches the hostile ground. In a very real sense, shoes are part of how a warm-weather African ape ended up living comfortably in Siberia. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Theory number two: status. Because shoes, almost from the very beginning, were never just about function. Think about who throughout history was allowed to wear what on their feet. In ancient Egypt, sandals were a marker of rank. Pharaohs and the elite wore them. Many ordinary people went barefoot, and there are depictions of servants whose entire job was to carry their master's sandals. In ancient Rome, the style and color of your footwear broadcast your exact social class, and certain elaborate boots were restricted to senators. Across countless cultures, going barefoot became associated with poverty, with servitude, with being lower down the ladder. In medieval Europe, there were literal laws, sumptuary laws, dictating how long the pointed toe of your shoe was allowed to be based on your noble rank. The higher your status, the more ridiculous and impractical your footwear was permitted to be, because impracticality itself became the flex. Look at me. My shoes say I don't need to work or run or do anything useful. We took a piece of survival equipment and turned it into a billboard. A way of announcing before you'd said a single word exactly where you stood in the hierarchy. Sound familiar? It's the same impulse that drove early humans to argue over who got to wear the leopard skin. The foot just became another canvas for the oldest human obsession there is: showing off. And then there's the twist nobody sees coming, the part where the shoe, the thing we invented to protect us, may have quietly turned around and made us weaker. Remember how tough the barefoot foot is? All those muscles and tendons, the thick natural callus, the toes that grip and flex and stabilize you on uneven ground. When you spend your entire life in cushioned, supportive, stiff-soled shoes, a lot of that machinery just stops getting used. The small muscles in your foot weaken. The arch relies on the shoe instead of doing its own job. The foot becomes, in a sense, dependent on the very thing we built to help it. Researchers who've studied populations that grew up barefoot found they tend to have wider, stronger feet, healthier toe spacing, and in some cases, fewer of the foot problems that are incredibly common in heavily shoe-wearing societies. Things like bunions, flat feet, certain kinds of chronic foot pain. This is the whole reason the barefoot running movement exists. People deliberately trying to undo what tens of thousands of years of footwear quietly did to their feet. The theory is that a thick cushioned heel changes how you strike the ground, encouraging you to land hard on the heel in a way the barefoot never would. Your body, it turns out, had a shock absorption system built in. We covered it up and then went looking for it in a shoe store. So we have this strange loop. We invented shoes to protect a foot that was already brilliant at protecting itself. The shoes worked. They let us cross deserts and ice sheets and conquer every climate on Earth. But the cost, slowly, generation by generation, was a foot that increasingly couldn't function without them. We didn't just put on shoes. We outsourced part of our own body to them, and then we forgot how to do it ourselves. So when did ancient humans start wearing shoes? The honest answer is, we don't know exactly, and we probably never will. The toe bones take us back about 40,000 years with real confidence, and hint at something even older. The oldest surviving shoe is a mere 10,000 years old, a tiny, lucky fragment of a story that's almost entirely missing. The drive behind it, the need to protect the one part of the body that touches the ground with every single step, is almost certainly older than any evidence we'll ever find. It may be nearly as old as walking itself. What we know for sure is this. By the time the historical record begins, humans everywhere had already wrapped their feet. The materials changed. Bark, hide, leather, plant fiber, eventually rubber and foam and whatever your sneakers are made of. The styles changed. The meanings changed. But the behavior was already ancient by the time anyone thought to write it down. And there's something quietly beautiful about that. For everything that separates you from that freezing ancestor on the riverbank, the bone needles, the cities, the internet, the absurd amount of footwear options you scroll past online, there's this one unbroken thread. You both looked at the ground, decided it wasn't allowed to hurt you anymore, and put something between your skin and the earth. You did it this morning. You didn't even think about it. You just reached down, slid your feet into something, and walked out into a world your ancestors spent 40,000 years trying to make a little less sharp. Every paved road, every floor, every soft sole is the descendant of that one frustrated decision on the riverbank. The whole project of human comfort, in a way, started at the bottom. It started with the feet. So here's my question for you. Could you do it? Could you actually go a full week barefoot, everywhere, no exceptions, the way every human on Earth did for most of our history? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.